Hi, welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time with Sister A. Legree. And today we have a treat. We are joined by Mr. Thomas Lockhart. Mr. Thomas Lockhart is a counselor, um, expert in recovery. I will let him tell you about himself, and then we can go into, I'm sorry, some of the questions. So if you want to start off telling us a little bit about yourself before we go into some of the questions.
Okay. My name is Thomas Lockhart. I'm a case manager slash service coordinator with so others might eat TW Perry Conway facility. I provide case management, mentoring, pretty much anything that the resident needs. I provide them with the resources and connections that they need to put their life back together. One of the things that I let everybody knows, I run what we call life recovery support group here also, is that if you ended up in a situation like this environment where you have to have supported housing, then you need recovery from life at some perspective. One of the qualifications to live in our type of housing is that you have to be formally homeless in any avenue, whether that's couch surfing, shelter, street homeless, uh, been in a nursing rehab, coming out of rehab, coming out of treatment, right? The number one criteria is to have been homeless, and we try to address the endemic and systemic problems that create homelessness. I grew up in Jersey and New York. I've been on my own since I was 17, and most of the things that our residents have experienced, I have experienced too.
Okay. All right. I want to kind of get into that. Um, if you can maybe sit back a little bit, because we
Oh,
like to hear
sorry.
about it. Okay, no problem. Okay. Now, one of the things I like what you said something, about life back together. And you and I were talking earlier, you were saying that you will have almost 18 years clean and sober.
Yes.
So, how did you get your life back together? And what has that been like as you come upon your 18 years?
So, I have had 4 years, 2 years, 9 years in the recovery process prior to this round. Um, what I had to do was first become broken and admit that I didn't know what I was doing with my life. You know, I had to become humble enough to allow somebody to teach me and guide me. Like one of the 12 step foundations is sponsorship, right? Previously to this round, I was never willing to listen to anybody. You know, this time around, I took some suggestions. And the other thing was faith. You have to know when God's working in your life. You know, I spent 6 months homeless in Philadelphia. Um, for about 4 months of that, I was living in an alley. And one day I said, okay, you win, I quit. My exact words were, okay, you win, I quit. I make myself that acceptable, presentable sacrifice. You either teach me how to transform and renew my mind or take me and kill me. And 2 hours later, a 21-year-old kid walked into alley, told me how God delivered him from underneath the bridge, and my life hasn't been the same since. So I also believe in divine intervention.
Mhm.
So
Okay. So when you're talking about the recovery process, what has been the hardest part? I know you talked about having to give up, but when you think about, I'm sorry, triggers, or you think about challenges or thoughts that would make you decide to go back, what has kept you going, and what advice would you give to people?
okay, can I touch the 12 steps real quick?
Yes, please.
So in any sort form of 12-step recovery, there are these first three principles. One, I admitted that I was powerless over my addiction and my life became unmanageable. Whether that addiction be food, sex, drugs, alcohol, money spending, whatever, right? But in this day and age, and especially for my generation, I don't exactly agree with that concept. Was it uncontrollable? Yes. Were the streets unmanageable? No, because if not, I'd be dead, especially where I come from. So I had to first try to figure out what was it that made me unmanageable. And it had nothing to do with drugs and alcohol. Because of the trauma that I've been through since I was a little kid, because of the molestation, because of um, the molestation by both males and females over extended periods of time at three different points in my life. Being light skinned during the Black Power generation, being ostracized by black folks, white folks, Spanish folks. I just didn't fit anybody's categories. And like, and having to fight all the time, being put out on my own, feeling unwanted, unloved, at 17 years old was a major contributing factor to why my life was unmanageable. And I realized that I had these long before I ever picked up a drink or a drug, or I had never picked them up to begin with. Healthy people with healthy hearts, minds, and souls don't go decide to become addicts. For me, the feeling of acceptance by the addicted community, right, was something that I fell in love with. So for me, I had to figure out what my unmanageability was, because our second step says a power greater than myself helped restore me to sanity. But well, if my thought process comes out of my unmanageability and everything I know is insane, why would I listen to me? And I had to realize, and I'm a minister, so like I had to realize that the power greater than myself and my higher power were two totally separate things. And I've been a knucklehead most of my life, and have been on the criminal side of things, and I have 4 cases for selling drugs in Philadelphia. And while I was in prison, I was teaching group on the second step in the program in there, and I realized that the sum total of the knowledge I possessed in my head had me sitting where I was at. And that I realized that that didn't have to do with God, because I had an inability to listen to people, which is why I kept going bang, why I kept relapsing, why I kept going in and out of the system, why I was always in somebody's emergency room or a program or shelter. And let me add this, bad relationships. You know, I had to take everything I know and throw it out the window and become willing to listen to somebody. And so power greater than me became anybody who could effectively help me make a better decision than I was capable of making by myself. And like I used you as an example, Arnetta, when I used to work at VOA. Listen, this is my boss, and she has a right to hire or fire me. When she told me to go park my behind in that office and do my notes and not to leave, that's a power greater than me, helping me straighten out my mess. So like my higher power, who I choose to call God, is who I bow down to, who I trust to put the people in my life to help guide me. And this for me was foundational, because the inventors of the step process all come out of the Oxford Foundation, which is a faith-based organization. And their life didn't become unmanageable till they lost all their money in the Great Depression. My life comes from abuse. My life comes from trauma, and those things need to be healed in order for a person to have a successful recovery. And it don't have to be completely healed, but if I have low self-esteem, low self-worth, negative self-image, and my answers are, I know what I'm doing, I got this, who you think you're talking to, don't tell me what to do, and I'm grown, and I keep going in a cycle of jail cells, emergency rooms, shelters, street corners, programs, and bad relationships, maybe I need to throw everything I know out the window and become willing to have somebody show me a different way to live. So, like, for me, the hardest temptation was always money, and not necessarily um, having money, but um, panicking when I had less than $500 and wanted to turn to street skills. which eventually would lead me back down different roads. And the other thing was, um, since 2017, I haven't had an inordinate amount of people who I love and care about pass away. And when my daughter died in 2017, it was only the support of the people that I had in recovery who kept me sane. And she was number 5 of 7 in 6 months. So I rely on my fellowships. I rely on the people I consider my mentors. I do have a sponsor who, when I really need to be vulnerable, that I can talk to. But I also recognize that I get my own best help is when I participate in my own recovery. I'm gonna say this as a conclusion to the question. Um, in the height of COVID, as it was winding down in 2021, I was at my count was at 33. And my boss said to me, "How do you tell people to get help every single day and you're not doing it for yourself?" And I was like, "What?" She's like, "You direct people to therapists, to treatment, to programs every day. What are you doing to work on your own?" And I'm like, she's got a point. And so I started going back to my 12-step fellowships. I dedicate my Fridays to my own recovery. And I also um, have a text ministry that I go back and forth with, and I start publishing stuff about how God works in recovery and life to help people become whole. I hope that answered your question.
It does, but can you talk more about participating in your own recovery? What does that mean? What does that look like?
So for me, participating in my own recovery is, I heard a quote in by the pastor of First Baptist Glenarden, when they were on Tasha Cobb's album. And he said, if you want a life of freedom, how do you expect to have that if you're not willing to change the things that you do? And I was like, wow. Because to participate in my own recovery, I have to be willing to change the way I think. I have to be willing to first not lean on my own understanding. You know, um, if I say I have a God of my understanding, then why don't I act like it? You know, going to the definition of faith, faith comes by hearing and hearing of the word of God. But the very next sentence says, and how can a person hear unless he have a preacher? But in Greek, that's teacher. So like for me to participate in my own recovery, I have to be willing to be taught. I have to be willing to listen. I have to be willing to process advice. And if 2 or more people tell me that I shouldn't do something, I need to at least weigh the options of what they're saying to me before I make a decision to act. Plus, I go to meetings. I also am lucky enough to work in the field where it's about recovery all the time, whether it be mental health, whether it be physical health, whether it be spiritual health or substance abuse. So it gives me an opportunity to see the realities of what's not working in people's lives so that I don't end up tripping over the same rock.
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely, because I hear what you're saying. You're saying people, your faith, meetings. Those are some of the things that keep you on the right path. But when I think about You were saying how we have to change the way we think, and for a lot of people, that's difficult. They'll say, I can't. You don't know what happened to me. This happened because you mentioned the trauma and the importance of being healed or on the path to healing from trauma in order to kind of go through the recovery process. What would you say to someone that's in that, I guess, that early stage?
I would say if we can teach you to heal, first I will give them homework.
Okay.
All right. I will tell them your homework is you have to look in the mirror 3 times a day. Your phone, black screen, whatever you can get a reflection from. You have to look yourself in the eyes and say, I love me, or name. I love myself, Thomas, and I'm going to be the man or woman that I choose to be. Right, and you're gonna say it till you believe it.
Hmm.
And as the evidence changes, you'll believe it. Because I truly believe, and this is not based upon my own thought process. This is based upon um, James Allen's "As a Man Thinketh," which is a book about self-perspective. It's 90 pages long. He was a professor at Oxford in the 1800s, and I think this book was published in 1898. It's and paperback is 90 pages. If you print it out, it's 21 pages. Most powerful book I've ever read in my life, and it's based on the proverb, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so he is." But it's not a religious or spiritual book. It's about self perception. If I perceive myself as being negative, if I perceive myself as being a nobody, if I perceive myself as going to be a convict for the rest of my life, or a person in abuse, then that's what I'm going to believe. And until I start learning how not to believe that, I'm destined to stay stuck in the same cycle. And I believe if you can heal a person's self-esteem, self-worth, and self-image, they'll never get high again, or they'll never slide into mental health challenges again, as long as they continue to do the work it takes to get better. And all of this requires work. It means showing up. It means making support groups. Doesn't have to be NA or AA. It could be smart recovery. It could be saving ourselves. It could be therapy. It could be IOP. It could be any form of help that helps me help myself. And I have to have the willingness to do it, because if I don't have the willingness, everybody's wasting their time.
Right, right, definitely. So that leads me to my next point here. Let's just say I am a person, I am homeless, I'm dealing with past trauma, history of jail. What would you say to me?
Do you want out?
Hmm.
Like I, I, I was all of that.
Right.
Like, to close out that part of my story, like I had 4 inches of hair, 2 black eyes. My left cheek was one raw patch of skin. I had got jumped. I hadn't shaved in 3 weeks. I hadn't had a shower in probably the same amount of time. I was dirty. I stank. But again, this 21-year-old kid, he made a simple offer. He said, "I can help you get out the street if you want." And my thing I used to tell people was there was nothing that I could do to get out of the street. That I was, because I had walked away from the ministry and I had to suffer under God's wrath until I figured out what He wanted me to learn. I can't. There's nothing I can do to make this transition. And they'd be like, "You're crazy," and I'd be like, "No, read Romans 2." And this kid came to me and he offered me a way out. And in the end, I said, "Yeah." He was like, "Just like that?" I said, "But I told you my story. I ain't asked you to help me. You came to me." And so, first, the willingness to do something different, right? Recognizing that there's an opportunity there. Like, I had a guy standing in front of Wawa downtown here in DC tell me that God would tell him when it's time. And I said, "Well, dude, I'm a minister. How do you know God's not telling you it's your time?" He was like, "Huh?" I'm like, "How do you know that it's not your time when all these other people walk past you and I have been you?" And I'm telling you that I have an opportunity for you to get out if you want to get out, but you have to want to get out.
Mhm, mhm. And I think that's the big part is many family members, friends, we will try to encourage our loved one. We will set up, treatment meetings, but until they want to, it's difficult. What would you say to a loved one or family member? There is the belief that we should let them hit rock bottom, and then there's the other belief that we shouldn't. Where do you fall in with that, or is it that black and white?
It's not black and white.
Hmm.
And each person in each situation is different, right? Um, my rock bottoms always kept getting deeper. So also, I will say this: I had my getting out of that lifestyle and that environment had nothing to do with wanting to stop using drugs. It had to do with not wanting to go back to jail. It also had to do with wanting to rebuild my relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren because like she wasn't speaking to me. But I didn't know that she had cancer. So part of my recovery walk is making a promise to her is that I will be there for her. That when she woke up coming out of surgery, the first face she would see would be mine. I couldn't do that if I was still using. So
Hmm.
like I don't care what the motivation is as long as somebody has some motivation because you never know what one word, what one experience, one thought that a person may have that may or somebody may say to them that may trigger them to pick up their blanket and walk. Because if that kid hadn't come to me, I would not have picked up my blanket. I would still be there, and nor would I have been willing to not willing. I wouldn't have been willing to use that blanket as a testimony to the power of change and transition and what God can do for a person. Because it's our duty to show people how we got out. Same thing is a recovery principle with the 12th step, to pass carry his message along. Um, and in this city, which of 750,000 people, there's only two detoxes in this whole city for a city that has a huge addiction problem. And like, so it takes people to be willing to talk to people in the street to give them alternatives other than trying to fit into the system. The city only has one, two, three, four residential treatment centers in the whole city, and one of those isn't actually in DC. It's in West Virginia, but it's owned by the agency I work for.
Right. And I think right where the point there is that all across the country that there's a shortage of treatment programs. So for us as individuals, it's important that we continue to keep talking, that we continue to show a light or to show resources, because you never know when that
Right.
person will make a change. Is that what you're saying, or?
I used to go after I got out of the street. I used to go back downtown in Philadelphia and talk to the people who were homeless, and I started setting up recovery houses to be able to accept people to just come in. And I can remember being under Suburban Station talking to some kids who were there to feed the people, and I told them, I said, "Listen, don't ever. If you're going to see the same faces over and over again, but if it's in your heart to continue in this kind of ministry, you can't stop because you don't know what one word you may say, what instance they may have, or one thing that may trigger them to do something different, right?" And they're like, "Well, how do you know that?" I said, "Because I was them, and it was a young kid like you who triggered me to do something different. You know, you can't ever give up hope in helping people, because it's not by my time, but by God's time that somebody comes out. And I learned that lesson the hard way. And because of that, God has allowed me to take a couple thousand people out of the street and help them turn their lives around. Not everybody was successful, but I did my job, which was to plant the seed. And like through, I don't ever turn my phone off, and I talk to everybody. And I tell people all the time, like, how do I sound to say this without, how do I go past the guy standing in front of 7-Eleven without at least asking them if they want something to eat? I'm not going to give them money, but I buy them food, because that gives me an opportunity to witness to them about having been them. So I don't ever give up on an individual. I got people actively getting high in my building right now. One of them I just told today, I said, my fear for you is that we're going to come in here and find you dead. And sometimes you have to be that raw. And I would advise family members, as much as it hurts, you have to find a balance in what you think is help and what you think is support and what you think is enabling somebody. Sometimes you have to lead the horse to water and force the drink down their throat. And sometimes you have to let them get so thirsty to the point where they don't have any other choice but to drink the water. You know, there's so many different pathways, and I honestly believe that spiritual health is just as important to a person's recovery as physical health is. Because if my body hurts, if the physical pain that runs through my system on a daily basis is going to make me seek relief. And if I have a strong spiritual foundation, that relief may come in my belief. Like, I don't care how you call the God of your understanding. I just hope you have one, right? If you're a Muslim, to be on your deen. If you're Hebrew, to be in the synagogue. To be Christian, to be Christian, follow the tenets of Christianity. Buddha, same thing. I believe that we as human beings need to have our spirits restored on a regular basis in order for us to continue to push forward. I read a book called Purpose Driven Life, and I had no idea what the purpose of my life was at the time that I started reading that book. And then the conclusion that I came to was that the only way for me to understand and utilize my purpose was to utilize my purpose in everything I do for the power that I call God. Am I a perfect person? No, not by any means. I smoke. If you push the wrong button, I make snap a little bit and cuss you out, until I find somebody to become a wife, I'm going to look at curves until I figure out if that person needs to be there. So, like, God called me as I am, which is how God calls everybody, not as other people think they should be. And he's given me different vehicles to use to help people transition their lives to something different. I have 150 people here in this building. If you look behind me, you'll see all of these inspirational signs and quotes. The door to my office is covered with them. There's probably another 150 signs and quotes that need to go back up because they had to paint, so they made me take them all down. Like, everything that we do needs to be of a purpose towards helping the next person coming along. And I learned this from my mentors, Pastors David and Diane Jones in Philadelphia. We had the largest faith-based drug and alcohol treatment center in the city of Philadelphia. And like literally would go out in the street and be like, hey, you want a new way of life? Come on down the steps. Um, I made my bones by going into the shelters and doing thought change dynamics, teaching CBT, REBT, um, how to understand that my thought process was twisted. You know, one of the things that I used to ask people is, who's worked for a temp agency? And they were like, how much did they pay you? Oh, $8 an hour. Oh, really? Are you worth that? Well, that's what they paid me. Yeah, but are you worth that? Because they don't believe that you're worth that. Because if you got paid $8 an hour, they got paid 16. So they believe you're worth 16. How come you don't?
Mhm.
You know, so like trying to teach people to see from a different perspective. But if all I ever known was pain, and pain is something I'm used to, I'm going to revert to that used to rather than deal with the pain of change.
And change can be difficult.
Right.
Mhm.
So there's two things that change requires or doesn't require. One is the pain of remaining the same or the pain of change. You know, and I believe that's why people relapse. People are addicted to chaos. They know they can survive the chaos because they're still alive when their friends, peers, loved ones are not here. So I'm not afraid to go back into a state of chaos, but I am afraid to try to prove that I don't belong in jail, to try to prove that I can have a job, to try to prove that I can have a bank account or something different.
Mhm. I think you're a witness that drug treatment works. Because there are some people who may feel that drug treatment doesn't work because of the number of times they've been in treatment or because of the number of times that their loved one has been in treatment. Well, number one, relapse happens, but just because you relapse, that doesn't mean that it's not working, right? It may just mean you need to do something different, but you're a witness that substance abuse, you're proof that treatment works.
Treatment does work,
Mhm.
and it works when you want it to work.
Mhm.
You know, um, I don't care if you got reservations about falling backwards, but if I stay in the treatment, I get an opportunity to build on the tools that I need to become successful in my recovery. So, um, your treatment does work,
Okay.
and, and I just think that the person has to make a commitment to doing something different.
Right, definitely. So as we prepare to close out, I'll let you have the last words because I know you have to go. So whatever you want to say as we close out.
Okay, for one, I want to say thank you, Arnetta, for having me on. I really, truly appreciate and love you. You are a person that I consider to be a mentor. Also, um, I love the recovery environment down here. It is so strong, and I believe that if the effort is put into helping save people, people will be saved. If it's not put into helping save people, it's the system is going to continue to produce the people that allow the system to get paid for whatever it is that they're trying to get paid for. And I believe that there's no such thing as throwaway people. I believe that the person sleeping on the park bench is just as important as a person sleeping in the Ritz Carlton. You know, so I will continue to do my part and continue to partnership with other agencies to bring in supportive services for my people. And recovery is holistic, mind, body, spiritual. You can't fix one without fixing the others. So encourage your people to go to the doctor, get a therapist, follow their faith, and take care of their body as well as stay abstinent from any chemical substances. So
Okay.
thank you
Sounds
so much.
good. Thank you so very much. You have a great day.
You too.